Let's get started. Welcome everyone to AngelMD's Emergency Medicine Pitch Club. We're very grateful to have all of you here, and we have three amazing companies that are pitching for us tonight. For those of you that haven't been to pitch night before, a couple of ground rules and a little explanation of what it's all about. AngelMD's Pitch Club really is an opportunity for companies to pitch, of course, their technology innovation, and an opportunity for those of you that are our attendees to ask questions. This is fun. It is exciting. This is not for investment this evening. So we really want to hear a lot more from this audience around the clinical aspects of their innovation, technology, or company. And so they're all very prepared to do that. We welcome your questions. You can start putting those into the Q&A during their pitch or right after their pitch. And we have a clinical expert here with us, Dr. John Dayton. John, do you want to wave so everybody knows who you are? Fantastic. Hey. Dr. Dayton is an emergency medicine physician, and he is going to be hosting our Q&A after each one of the presentations. We will also ask all of our attendees to rate the companies after the pitch has been completed. Those questions will show up in a poll that'll pop up on your screen, and we would love to get your feedback. We do share the feedback with our founders and CEOs and others that are here with us on the event tonight, the webinar tonight. So please, we would love to get your feedback. It's really important to the companies and the folks that we have here presenting. I want to introduce some folks that are part of our AngelMD team here tonight. We have Tobin Arthur, who is our founder and executive chairman. We have Jennifer Arthur, who is our co-CEO of membership. And as I mentioned, I'm Katie Richardson, and I am our VP of Clinical Relations. So we are going to go ahead and get started tonight. And our first presenter is Dr. Michael Gorn. Dr. Gorn is the co-founder and chief medical officer of EM Device Lab. Welcome, Dr. Gorn. Go ahead and share your slides. We're excited to hear about your company.
All right, well, thank you for having me here, and I'm just gonna get into it. So we're EM Device, and we're reinventing abscess treatment. And I know all your physicians are looking at it going, well, why does abscess treatment need to be reinvented, right? It's an old procedure. You cut it open, you wash it out, you stick some packing in it, and then you have patients come back to you, for packing revisits or wound checks and et cetera. Here's the problem though. When you're explaining all of that to the patients, they look at you as you're the clown that's gonna cut me, right? Because we know that abscess drainage is the #2 most painful ER procedure, and we do this millions of times a year. And perhaps that, there's some room to improve what we're doing. And in fact, over the past 20 years, there's been a new technique that's been emerging called the loop drainage, and it has demonstrated improved outcomes and patient satisfaction. So let's just review that real quick. So instead of making a big incision, 2 puncture wounds are created, and then through those wounds, you could see there's a drain or tubing or a string that's being dragged through. It's tied over the skin, and that's really what maintains the abscess cavity open and allows for the fluid to drain. You could place it in any place. You would do an IND procedure, so for any cutaneous abscess, and this is kind of what it looks like in real imaging. And here's the data. So a meta-analysis in 2018 demonstrated that there's a lower failure rates associated with the loop technique, and 2 recent RCTs from emergency departments showed statistically significant decrease in failure rates in kids, overall pain, hospital return visits, overall complications, and antibiotic use. And kind of 2 other things that are on the table there is cosmetic outcomes and just overall cost for hospitalized patients, because we know that they get discharged sooner with with this technique. So unfortunately, this technique can be cumbersome to do, and it has not undergone a lot of adoption for that reason. There's no standard device, there's no standard equipment, but really the data shows that it should be the new gold standard. And so that's why EM Device is introducing the quick loop. And what you're seeing there is basically all the steps of the loop procedure combined into one. So you have essentially you have an introducer that contains a needle piece, and that needle features a cutting point that makes for an easy entry. And then there's an incising blade with a 11 blade geometry on the back, and that makes an incision that's big enough to fit the tubing and also for the drainage to go around it once it's in place. The tubing is hollow and has fenestrations, and this is an added feature to the loop technique because now we can irrigate from inside out once this device is in place. And then you have a hub that really serves two purposes. One is to easily close the loop, and another, it has a lure lock that allows you to attach a syringe and do the irrigation. So let's kind of look at it in action. You start on one side of the abscess, you push it, the needle through with a standard suture technique. As you're pushing it in, you could see the incision being made, and then the tubing fits easily, and there's drainage that goes around it. And all of 10 seconds, the device is in place. You cut the needle off. You can size the tube to be as large or as little as you want it to be. So in particular locations, you may want this device to be a little longer than in others. And then once the fastener is closed, that's permanently secured, and the device is in place. You have enough room to do loculation breakup if you so choose to on both sides of the device. And then you can express the pus and attach any size syringe and irrigate through the fenestrations. Now, based on our research, you can push 60 cc's of fluid in under 10 seconds really through that abscess cavity. And that really allows you to wash out all the pus. There's no painful packing that's requirement, and there's also no revisit. So once these patients go home, they really don't need to come back to see you again. The device is easily secured to the skin, and while the clinician can do the irrigation at the time of device placement, the patient can also continue to do irrigation at home, and at the end of 5 to 10 days, they just kind of cut one side of it and pull it out, and they don't need to return for follow-up. So this is the quick loop, and it's our all-in-one abscess treatment device. We believe that the total market for this device is about $1 billion worldwide. And interestingly, we think that there's application in dental and veterinary medicine as well. Not with this particular one, but another version of it. But really, majority of these procedures are done in the ER. So our beachhead market is the US ERs, which is worth about $75 million. There's already an existing code for abscess drainage, and given that we're placing a loop, a drain, this procedure actually qualifies for the up code to the 6.1. And as you all know, all CPT codes now come with global 10-day period. So when they come back to you for dressing change or repacking or anything like that, chances are you're not getting reimbursed. And so this is really where the healthcare savings come in, is you're not spending your time on unreimbursed care. We have an efficient business model. We plan to educate through ER staffing companies and other educational companies. We also plan to have our own educational platform. We'll do inside sales. It's set up for 70% gross margin return. We do have a US-based contract manufacturer and a 5-year sales ramp going from $2 million to $54 million. The exit strategy for a small company like us would be a sale or an acquisition. Most medical devices companies go for 4 to 6 times their gross revenues, and we plan to look at this at year 4 or 5. So in summary, we believe we have a $1 billion market that's associated with abscess drainage and abscess care. It is going to be a straightforward regulatory process. A device will be 510(k) exempt. There's already reimbursement that exists. We actually validated this device with over 600 physicians. We've taken it to simulation labs and cadaver labs. We have 2 patents that have been granted and 2 pending. And at this point, we are set to launch in Q1 of 2021. So I'm going to stop right here and take any questions you may have. And thank you for allowing me to present here.
Dr. Gorn, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Dayton, who's going to help us with the questions, and we have quite a few. Just so everybody knows, we only have 5 minutes for Q&A, so those questions that don't get answered live right now, we will give the founders and others a chance to answer them after the event and potentially at the end if we have additional time.
All right. Sounds great. So it looks like the questions for this are mostly based on the device cost, the device size, and research related to that. So let's just kind of take those one by one. One of the questions from Kendall Wyatt is wondering if this comes in more than one size.
Yeah, so our initial product is going to be one size, and you know, we are looking to expand to smaller versions of this for the smaller abscesses. There's a clipless version of this that can go intraoral or intracavitary, like in the abscess in the nasal cavity and things like that. And obviously a veterinary one would be bigger. So the plan is to roll this out initially as a standalone device and then add it into a kit and then size it, you know, to different measures. Now, I could tell you that the size of that needle is based on clinical data. If you look at most studies, they kind of suggest 4 centimeter spacing between the incision sites. So that's what this initial device is sized to.
Okay. Up next, a question about the cost difference. I know when I do these in the ED, if you drain an abscess, a lot of times you're using a combination of equipment from a suture tray, and then you're trying to find a vessel loop somewhere else. What is the cost difference between how it's currently done versus the one unit device?
So we've done this research kind of within the ER space and urgent care space and primary care space. I think you can probably say that the equipment you're using right now is about $20 in cost, you know, depending on which suture kit you use. Some people just use an instrument kit, which is probably a little cheaper, versus the cost of this device is anticipated to be about $50. So yeah, you're paying a $30 premium. But for that $30 premium, you're saving yourself a lot of time during procedure. You're also saving those unreimbursed return visits. You know, and every time somebody turns over a room, especially in COVID times, it's costing you a lot of time and money. So it's a $30 premium that you get paid back in multiple if you're using it appropriately and you're replacing the existing technique.
That makes sense. So one other question that was asked is, do you need more anesthesia for this? And what's the pain experience with this versus a traditional IND for incision and drainage?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I could tell you in my clinical practice, I've been doing loop technique for the past 5 years exclusively. I don't do any other technique. I don't pack abscesses. The place where I practice, the general surgeons, when they take them to the OR, they place loops. They don't pack anymore. So in terms of anesthesia, if I don't feel like something needs to be manipulated a lot, so there's not a loculation breakdown, I actually just numb up the sites where I'm going to enter. So, you know, basically 2 sites on either side of the abscess, and then I do the technique. I anticipate with this device, the pain is going to be even less because you have a lot less manipulation of trying to get the instrument inside and tunnel the tubing through, which is probably where most of the pain comes from. So I anticipate that it's going to be less pain, and especially in the pediatric population, it may lead to less sedation, which again is another cost saving from our standpoint.
Excellent. And I think we probably have time for one more question. Katie, cut me off if I'm going long, but there was a question about research on the device. I saw you noted research earlier, and you mentioned talking with emergency physicians. Do you have any specific research based on this device alone, as opposed to vessel loop procedures in general?
Right. So at this point, there's no research on this specific device, but because we are basically the loop technique, you know, if you look at the body literature for the loop, they've used various things. There's Penrose drains, there's Vesey loops, there's in this case reports of using rubber gloves, right? So we're not really changing up the technique, we're just changing up the way we're doing it, and then we're adding irrigation to it, which, you know, we anticipate will have, you know, increased role in healing. But again, before the studies are done, we can't say that. But I think that there's robust literature out there now supporting the loop technique, and that's what we're doing.
That makes sense. And this is my own question. A lot of times if you do an IND, a really bad one, you'll have a lot of loculations and you're really needing to manipulate the device in a lot of areas. Are you able to break up multiple loculations with this method as well?
Yeah, so if you could just recall the video, that incision that's being made allows you to pass an instrument through the incision sites on both sides. And if you're, you know, basically your instrument's maybe 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters long, and if you make a 360 with it, right, on both sides, it allows you to access about 8 to 10 centimeters of diameter of an abscess to break up your loculations and really do a good job with it. So we believe that one device can cover about 8 to 10 centimeter diameter abscess. If it's a larger area or there's, you know, multiple, then you could place multiple devices. There's really no need to convert to IND anymore.
Excellent. You guys said a lot of pain points on a very common procedure that's fraught with packing falling out and all kind of other troubles. So very impressive. Are there any questions from the panel?
I think we're good at this point. Dr. Gorn, thank you so much for your presentation tonight. Thank you for being here. As a pediatrician, I definitely look at this and, you know, given access to a smaller device, I was commenting on the fact that I might be out of residency so long that I did not learn the loop technique, but it seems like a very, very cool thing to be able to do for patients. So thank you for being here. Thanks for presenting. If we have some time at the end, we'll get to a few additional questions as well. So we're going to put up a poll right now that essentially asks you some questions about EM Device Lab and the presentation today. We'll leave that up for a few minutes. For those of you that are in attendance here, as I mentioned earlier, this is your opportunity to give feedback to our companies and our founders, and we would love for you to do that because we will share that feedback with the companies. So please, please, please go ahead and fill out the poll, give us feedback. We'd love to be able to share that again with Dr. Gorn and the EM Device Lab folks. And while you are filling out the poll, Jennifer is also going to talk to us about our AngelMD Clinical Advisory Board.
Thank you, Katie. So we actually have a few members here tonight, but the Clinical Advisory Board is really an opportunity for clinicians from the various specialties to there's kind of two main things that we work with you on. First is meeting with the finance approval team for our funds to provide insights about your specialties. What's going on in your specialties? Where are you seeing or either innovation going on or the need for innovation, as well as challenges that are happening within your category that just helps with the team to better understand your specialty and what's going on. The other piece is we actually do more in-depth evaluations of companies to really provide more in-depth feedback, but also to let us know what are good investments for us to engage with going forward. And so we ask clinicians or give the clinicians in our clinical advisory board the first opportunity to participate in these evaluations and really getting broader exposure to companies that are innovating within your specialties. There's opportunities too, if you know startups, we would love for you to introduce them to us, but we are kicking off our first meetings later this month. And so I will put in the chat a link to a form that if you're interested in participating in the clinical advisory board, then you can fill out this form. We look at basically doing meetings about once a quarter for each specialty.
Great. We would love to have you. So if there are folks in the audience tonight that would like to join, please fill out that form and we will be in touch with the date and time of your specialties first call, which are coming up, as Jennifer said, at the end of the month. All right, we're going to move on to our second company. We have closed the poll. Thanks to all of you who answered the poll. Again, that feedback is really important to the companies and we really appreciate it. So our next company is Agathos, and we have Vanessa Carmian here tonight, who is Agathos head of sales, and we're super excited for her to do a presentation tonight about a company, at least in my mind, that is very cool. It's what I would say is the beginning of trusted transparency of data, which is awesome. Vanessa, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Perfect, great. And you can see my screen and you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for having me, Katie, and the AngelMD community and everybody here today. I'm going to get my timer started so I can keep track of where I'm at. But as Katie said, I'm Vanessa Carmian, head of sales here at Agathos, and we are a Boulder, Colorado-based company. We're 5 years old, and we're focused on empowering physicians to reduce clinical variation. So we started with our focus on hospital medicine 5 years ago, and just this summer, we deployed our emergency medicine module in our first 2 hospitals in June. And so what we do is Agathos was founded because we know that unwarranted clinical variation results in a lower quality patient care, results in longer length of stay, and it increases costs for hospital systems. And we also know that even when physicians and hospitals want to decrease their clinical variation and streamline flow in the emergency department, they don't always have visibility into the clinical into actionable data about how to do that. And today what data typically looks like is it looks like data's provided via a dashboard that the physician has to go to, and they have to distill the information on their own. And there's meetings and there's customer reports and there's a lot of administrators' effort on that. And so in speaking with hospitals, we see a lot of scenarios like what is shown on the screen here, where we have leadership asking physicians to change an outcome, but physicians are saying, you know, I don't necessarily know what to do differently. Recently, you know, I heard a story about an administrator who had spent countless hours with a specific physician trying to change a practice pattern, but without any effect. At the bottom here, I have a few numbers on what the size of the clinical variation kind of opportunity is: $760 billion in annual waste, $75 billion that could be attributed to overtreatment or low value care. And so what Agathos does is we developed Agathos to be a transparency platform for physicians. So we're using clinical data and delivering action level feedback in what we call insights to physicians. So these are text messages that then open a web-based mobile app, which I'll show you in a minute. And really importantly, we know that medicine's a team sport. So we've put a lot of effort into making sure that we're using clinical data with precise attribution. And we also show recent case examples so that we can really establish ownership and influence into what decisions are being made. And importantly, we show data that's relative to peers that you know and that you work with, so that you kind of get to learn and trust our data. So in this slide specifically on the left side, we're showing some of the categories of insights we've developed specific to emergency medicine. And the idea is that by impacting the practice patterns of those insights specifically, we'll be able to deliver change in the outcome measures that are on the right side of the screen, similar to what we've already done in hospital medicine. So I'm going to go ahead and just show this demo, which I think we'll go ahead and get started on its own here and talk over what it looks like. So this is data from our hospital medicine module. So it has fake patient data, but the opioid prescription rate is something that is part of our emergency medicine module. So what you'll do is that physicians, let me see if I can just pause it real fast. Physicians will see a text message that they can click on that will log them into our web mobile app. And here you'll get to see, for example, opioid prescription rates. And so for this physician, they can see that of their 87 physicians, you can see that 23% of them they prescribe opioids for. Or that's, you know, if you look at the peer comparison, that's just under the group average. And so if we scroll down, which it will in just a moment, we'll look at historical data, and I'll let it catch up. Don't think it's And that historical data will show that this physician is prescribing opioids at a lower rate than they were 2 years ago. And so that might make a physician feel good about the data that they see. And we also use unblinded data so you can go and talk to your peers as well. And so also importantly, we're providing information here, as you can see, about why this insight's important, information on best practices. There's data about how we, as you see here, calculate the insight and attribution. We also provide, for example, here, definitions on what medications we're talking about when we talk about an opioid insight. And then we also provide fake data, again, information on why this insight's, information on specific recent case examples so that a physician will know, get to learn, they'll trust our data and trust what we're showing them because they might be recent case examples that they remember. And so really importantly, also we ask for feedback for the physician. So we do that with a 5-star system. We also have a kind of a text box, a pre-filled text box you can select from. And then we have a free text field as well. And so that allows us to then interact with the physician to understand, if an insight's not landing or if they have feedback on it or they're really liking feedback on something, we can work directly with the physician to get that information from them. All right, so let's go forward. So this is a real example of Agathos here in action. So this is data from one of our hospitals where we've been live for over 2 years. And so most physicians at this group were overutilizing comprehensive metabolic panels before Agathos. And if you look at the data on the left, the group score was inflated by a handful of outliers. So what we saw, and the score on the left is the baseline for each individual physician prior to delivery of our insights. And so on the right-hand side, you can see comprehensive metabolic panels versus BMPs over time. So right on the y-axis is a percentage of CMPs versus BMPs, time on the x-axis. And what's really interesting and important here is this orange line is one specific physician who was an outlier, and the gray line is the group data of the physicians. And so each vertical line, as you look at this, each vertical blue line is one CMP related insight that's being sent. And so we can see for this one particular physician, they decreased their CMP ordering by 88% after Agathos was deployed. And the group decreased by 47%. And what's really important here is that this is both immediate and sustained change. And it's a fairly typical story of what we'll frequently see. So an outlier might not realize they're an outlier until they see their data compared to their peers. And in this case, this particular hospitalist had been trained as a hepatologist. And so they thought they were doing the right thing. They were ordering for CMP so that they could look at liver values. And once this physician saw that he saw his practice patterns compared to his peers, he immediately changed his ordering habits and started ordering CMPs, only for the first lab. And then if he saw liver values were elevated, he'd continue ordering them, but otherwise he'd order BMPs. And just to kind of wrap things up here. So this is our leadership team on our left, but essentially Agathos we were founded in 2015. To date, we've raised, we have $2.3 million in ARR. We've raised $4.5 million. We're expecting to raise $7 million in our upcoming round. Importantly, we're in 7 hospitals today with our with our hospital medicine module. We have 2 hospitals with emergency medicine. We have a third hospital that's we'll be going live in the next couple of months. And then we're expanding into critical care in Q1 and have already signed that hospital. So we have a significant amount of traction. And we have a few advanced discussions with some hospitals and systems that are where I think we're going to close our 3 largest deals to date within the next few months. So really, right now, our biggest challenge is not differentiating ourselves from people that look like us, but it is differentiating ourselves from kind of the noise of digital health in general, right? We don't necessarily fit into a typical category of innovation or of budgets, which we kind of expected, given that we really wanted to build a solution for physicians first. And, we've been building our product for the past 5 years. We've recently doubled down our sales efforts. We have plans to expand our marketing efforts and our marketing team in the near future. And in general, we have a strong team and we're backed by experienced investors. We've got a great customer base. We've got 7 medical advisors, including 2 emergency physicians. And we're going to use our next round to develop our product and growth on our customer base. So we're confident. I'm excited to be here. We're excited about what we're doing, and I would love to chat more. I've already gone over. So I'll put my contact information in the chat and hand it back to you guys for questions.
Great. Vanessa, thank you so much. If I had my gong, I was almost going to hit it because you're right. You were a little over time, but we'll let you take it tonight.
I know, I was trying to keep track, but I was trying to also pay attention to what I was doing. Thanks.
No worries. I get it. It's hard to do everything at once. Dr. Dayton, do you want to get to our Q&A? It looks like we have quite a few questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. A brilliant idea, and congrats on the traction you have so far. The questions are mostly based on around the sources of the data and also HIPAA compliance with the text messaging. Regarding the source of the data, you had some information about opioids. Is this from a state controlled substance database, or is this data that's getting slurped from Epic or Cerner? How does this process work?
Yeah, so great questions. I'll kind of answer all of that. So right now, all of our hospitals that we're in, hospital systems that we're working with, are Epic hospitals. So we use an Epic database that we're pulling from. We are looking in the next year to move into Cerner and expand into other electronic medical records. The other part of your question, there was something else you had asked.
Yeah, the other question someone was asking is, this information that's going out in text messages, is there HIPAA compliance? Are the HIPAA compliance measures taking place?
Absolutely, yeah, we're HIPAA compliant today. We're working on getting high trust certified as well. The information that is in the text message does not have any protected health information, so that's really important. And then to access the data, to access your patient's data, which of course does have PHI, does require a login. And we work with every hospital individually based on their security preferences to make sure that we are compliant with what they need.
Oh, excellent. Well, one of the questions is addressing, you're comparable to your colleagues. If you're in a situation where everyone does everything right, or maybe people do everything a little bit different, is there a way where you can track it according to outcomes based as opposed to variability?
Yeah, so right now we are looking at outcomes as part of our vision. Right now we do look at more at DRG when we're looking at the amount of, when we're assessing what the data is that we send. But one thing that is important is because we are bringing a lot of data together, we wait until we have a sufficient sample size. So we can think that probably most hospitalists over a certain amount, or most emergency physicians over a certain amount of time, see a population that is similar enough that they can compare.
And
we'll work with administration also.
This is a question I have with Epic. You have so much data. Okay. One of the things that I'm about is, with Epic, you have so much data, and you're talking about variability. Are you able to collect information on throughput? I know a lot of times in the emergency department, we think, what's our rate limiting step for the night? Is it the time to get our image results? Is it time for a specific lab? Are you able to track down things like that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're looking at throughput, and we're looking at specifically, we've tried to sort of break that into different components, right? So we look at door to disposition, door to discharge, door to doctor. So we are pulling that out of our Epic Clarity databases.
That makes sense. And then one of the final questions was about what's your monetization strategy? How do you charge for this? Is it a monthly service charge? How does that work?
Yeah, so you or I broke up for just a second there, but what I heard the question was like, what's our revenue model, right? How are we monetizing this?
Yes, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So what we do is we charge a platform fee for kind of the access and the data flow, a customer success fee, because one big important part is how much our team spends with the physicians and looking at the insights and making and engagement. We have over 75% average engagement by physicians. And so that's a really important part of what we do. But the biggest part of our revenue is a per month per user fee.
Okay. And one more quick question. Those metrics you mentioned, door to doctor, door to discharge, things like that are typical CMS metrics. Are groups able to come to you with very specific things? They say, we want to track, time for this lab, or we want to track something that's outside of what CMS is measuring? Are you able to accommodate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to really quickly, if I can, throw up on the screen all of the insights that we look at. I should say the beginning of our emergency medicine insight. Can you see that right there? And yes, we do work with we do work with the different hospital systems to kind of customize the insights based on what they think is most important.
Excellent. Are there any questions from other members of the board?
I think we're good. Thank you to Vanessa and Agathos, and thank you very much, Dr. Dayton, for facilitating our Q&A as well. We, excuse me, we definitely had a lot of great questions there, and if we didn't get to your question live today, we will send those to Agathos for follow-up in the end. Again, we have put up our poll to give feedback to Agathos on the pitch tonight. I know that they would love your insights and thoughts about their company, their presentation, etc. And again, we take this data and we deliver it directly to the company, their founders, etc. And we will move on to our third company of the evening. So we have with us Dr. Austin Johnson, who is co-founder and president of Certus Critical Care. We're excited to learn about your company as well.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, whenever you're
All right, great. Thanks so much. My name is Austin Johnson. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I'm one of the co-founders of Certus. I'd like to thank AngelMD for the opportunity to talk to everyone tonight, and then thank all of you for listening to our stories. At Certus, we are building technologies to improve patients who have suffered from a stroke. And this is primarily through smart, intelligent endovascular balloon catheters. So I want to start though, before we talk about stroke, at like the 10,000 foot view. And the 10,000 foot view is around hemodynamic control. If you think about hemodynamics on how we control hemodynamics, we don't have any precision ways to control hemodynamics on a second to second and minute to minute basis, right? We give medications that take time to start to work and have long half-lives. We give blood to patients who are bleeding. We give fluids to patients who are in shock. But if you imagine, it takes time for all of those things to work. And unfortunately, for those of us who practice emergency medicine, or those of you who are, it's not just emergency medicine, it's our acute care surgeons, it's our cardiologists, it's our neurologists, et cetera. We have a lot of patients who actually time really does matter, right? Think about the patient who's suffering from a stroke that are losing, 1 billion neurons a minute. Think about your patient who's suffering from a cardiac arrest where you have maybe 15 minutes of CPR in order to perfuse those coronaries before it really probably isn't worth continuing, or our patients who are bleeding out from trauma, right? We don't have great ways to precisely control their blood pressure or control their blood flow or control their hemodynamics. And that's what Certus has been focusing on. I'm specifically very interested in stroke. I'm trained as a neuroscientist as well. And I've been interested in stroke for a long time, and really around the hemodynamics of stroke and other neurologic emergencies. If we think about stroke, we've been playing around with trying to find ideal blood pressure targets for a long time, unsuccessfully. But over the last 5 to 10 years, one thing that has come out of all the literature is that blood pressure variability is really important. So blood pressure variability, instead of just like finding the ideal blood pressure variability is how much your blood pressure is changing around a mean, right? How big are the peaks, how big are the valleys, and how many of them are you having over time? And in patients who are suffering from a stroke, blood pressure variability is very important. If we look at all, and this is multiple studies, if we look at all comers, the association between poor neurologic outcome and blood pressure variability is very, very strong. So patients with large lesion core strokes, with large mismatches, et cetera, who have lots of blood pressure variability have worse neurologic outcomes. If we look at patients who get TPA, right, so clot busting drugs for strokes, there is a strong, that the patients who have high blood pressure variability have about a 2.5-fold incidence of having a hemorrhagic conversion, right? So actually bleeding into their brain, which is, for all of us who use TPA, is like the worst complication. And then in patients who get thrombectomies, we go and actually pull the stroke, the clot out. High blood pressure variability, again, is associated with much worse outcomes and actually mortality. So it's a big problem, but if you imagine, we can't titrate medications fast enough to control blood pressure on a second-to-second and minute-to-minute basis. Well, at Certus, we think we have a solution to this, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't think so, and that's through endovascular devices. So unlike medications that take time to work, when you endovascular devices, and specifically our catheter, which is inserted through the femoral artery up into the descending thoracic aorta, actually can modulate blood pressure much, much faster. And that's because when you inflate, even partially inflate or deflate a balloon in the aorta, you're actually controlling afterload, and it's mechanical. So you get almost instantaneous changes in blood pressure. And you can then control blood pressure and smooth out blood pressure really, really well. Our catheter has been simplified extensively to make it very user-friendly. All the physiologic sensors you may need are integrated into the catheter itself. You don't need to you don't have to set up art lines, you don't have to flush art lines, you don't have to do anything like that. You put the device in, everything's in the catheter, and immediately starts giving you data. And then if you imagine, we're actually controlling a partially inflated balloon in the aorta. And so we're constantly making microliter adjustment changes in that balloon volume every couple of seconds. And so that all gets done through automation, through a series of adaptive algorithms, because you and I, can't make those changes fast enough, and also we don't want to make those changes because it would be really boring. So this isn't a completely crazy idea. So currently there's a concept of REBOA, resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta. We use it for hemorrhage control, completely occlude the aorta, stop bleeding. Obviously it has massive ischemic complications. That is not what we're doing. We're using just a little bit of inflation of a partially inflated balloon and modulating it to smooth out blood pressure and perfusion. The stroke market within the United States is really big. We believe that all the patients who get TPA and all the patients who get thrombectomy would be appropriate patients for our therapy. On top of that, those other patients who can't get TPA and thrombectomy that we don't have a lot of opportunities and a lot of options for, about 50% of them have significant blood pressure variability. So we think we're going to offer a new therapy for those patients as well. Even with the 25% market share, this is a really, really big business. And it's very nice that there are already reimbursement codes out there for endovascular devices and aortic occlusion devices. That being said, we haven't only thought about stroke. I'll be honest, I'm going to tell you, we've been funded extensively about building better hemorrhage control therapies. And hemorrhage control is a large market, might be a little bit harder to get to, but we're also looking at hemorrhage control. We're also looking at cardiac arrest. There are several clinical trials going on right now with aortic occlusion during CPR in order to maximize coronary perfusion. And so we are looking at these other indications as well. What is our timeline? So we've been at this for a little while. We plan to be through with a design freeze for our catheter at the first quarter of next year. The same catheter for hemorrhage and for stroke, it just has slightly different algorithms. We're going to go through much of next year will be around V&V, and that'll be putting together our 510K for hemorrhage, and then also preparing for our IDE for our stroke trial, which will finish in 2023. We've been funded very heavily to date with non-dilutive funding. We've done about $6.7 million in non-dilutive funding to build these algorithms, to build the therapies themselves. And we've done about $3.7 million in non-dilutive funding to actually build the device. And we have a small round of friends and family that keeps the lights on. We've had about $1.8 million for device development that's on its way as well, that's non-dilutional. And then we keep, we have $3.6 million of funding that we're going after right now that continues that non-dilutional funding. We are doing an initial raise right now. Like I said, and we're just doing our first raise now. It's about 4 million. And we think we're addressing a really big problem, and we think we have a really smart solution to it. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Austin, for your presentation. And for those of you that are in our audience, if you have any questions for Austin about Certus, please put those in the Q&A. And I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Dayton to ask some of our questions.
All right, thank you. The first question that we have from our audience is what's the incidence of thrombosis around the catheter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, so that is very dependent on what your indication for use is, right? So when catheters like this are used for hemorrhage control, We do see some thrombosis in the leg, like in the distal vasculature. The nice thing about stroke is a lot of these patients are getting are either getting heparinized during their thrombectomies or they're getting TPA. And overall, it's relatively safe to put at least some systemic anticoagulation on these patients. So another reason we're really interested in stroke is that it increases the safety. That being said, when we think about hemorrhage control with our device, we aren't a complete aortic occlusion device. We allow little bits of blood flow past the balloon as the patient's physiology tolerates it, which we believe is going to decrease the potential thrombus complications for hemorrhage specifically.
Interesting. So looking at your timeline, it looks like you're on looking at animal trials right now. Most of the type of research for this type of a Roboa type device, I guess there's nothing like what you have, but a Roboa type device is based on blood loss. How are you designing the testing in the animal model for stroke and for
Great
other
question.
uses?
So we've done, I'll be honest with you, we've done hundreds of animals to date in order to build this therapy, to build the algorithms. We've met with the FDA for our hemorrhage control. We actually only have one more small safety study to do. That'll be our last study. We do a lot of our testing around algorithms within flow chambers where we have much more control over the physiology and to get into all those corner cases that are required around automation. The stroke, it's interesting, the stroke, there aren't great animal models of stroke, fundamentally. End of the story. They just don't really exist. And that is why, we certainly are doing a series of animal studies to show safety and to show safety over time. And that's why a clinical trial is going to be eventually required. And that's where our timeline takes us out to about, the next several years in order to finish that clinical trial.
Well, excellent. Best of luck with those. One of the questions that's come across is, how does manipulating that blood pressure affect the counter mechanisms related to cerebral perfusion pressure and changes in the ICP or intracerebral pressure?
Yeah. So it's no different than you're changing your blood pressure in any other way, except in some cases, we think it may be actually beneficial. So we are changing it mechanically at the level of the aorta. If you think about some of our therapies, for instance, epinephrine use in cardiac arrest, where we're now a little bit concerned about high dose epinephrine use because it may cause cerebral vasoconstriction. And when you're using epi to, maintain someone's blood pressure, we actually think we're probably going to actually be able to improve cerebral perfusion because we're not going to have to need as much vasopressor, potentially post-cardiac arrest. But you can think of it as any other device or any other medication that's affecting systemic vascular resistance, and in terms of how it's going to affect cerebral perfusion pressure.
And along those lines, with most of the research in the past being related to blood loss, are you looking at different placements? There's the 3 different zones you look at with Roboa. Is there a theoretical area that's more optimal for a stroll or other controls for the device? Or are you looking at putting in the same 3 zones?
Yeah, so for the majority of stroke patients, we would be looking at zone 1. The reason why is it gives you the best control. If you think about it, you're up above, your viscera, all the viscera. And what's important to think about is, we aren't even getting close to complete aortic occlusion. We have really good blood pressure still below the balloon. We have really good flow below the balloon. We're just like a tiny little sail sitting in the aorta, making little changes to just make small changes and smooth out blood pressure. So zone 1 is the best place for that. Although if someone's blood, if someone tolerated, you could do it in zone 3 as well. In general, we stay away from zone 2. But I think that's one of the major differences between what we've developed and what other people doing aortic interventions around, for instance, hemorrhage control is, those have very profound ischemic consequences. So you always want to get it in as low down as you can and then get it out as quickly as possible. Because we're able to mitigate that by, sort of partially by just the therapy itself and then the intelligence, right? Our catheters and our algorithms are constantly assessing the physiology. So we know when we've started to push things too far, and then we can actually alert the user of that.
Along those lines, you've mentioned some trials with animals before the specifics began. How are you tracking the that your device algorithms will work quicker than a titratable nicardipine or nimodipine?
So we've done this, in terms of like smoothing out blood pressure itself, we've done studies in pigs where we have a very, rocky hemodynamic course, and we're trying to maintain a smooth hemodynamics with fluids and vasopressors and any medications versus our device, just head to head. The other thing I'll tell you is, we automate a ton of it, right? So we build the best algorithms we can, both for our device, but as well as for our other interventions, because we don't want to have bias within the system. And kind of over and over again, we've shown we can significantly decrease blood pressure variability quite easily, with the device, mostly done in pig studies.
Interesting. Are there questions from other members?
I think we're good. Thank you, Dr. Dayton, and thanks to all of you who submitted questions in the Q&A. And thank you to Austin and Certus for your presentation. We really appreciate it. I think we have time for one more question for all companies. So I'm going to start with Michael and EM Device on this one. So this is for all of you. We would love to hear, some of you touched on this a little bit, but your thoughts on exit strategy from each of you, and really specifically more on who buys you and what do you need to see to get there, essentially.
I go first, I guess, huh?
Cool. Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and internally we always discuss this, right? So we are a small, cheap, disposable device, and so our buyer would be somebody who just needs another good device in their bag. So we looked at companies like Medline and maybe Teleflex and maybe Johnson & Johnson, maybe BD, maybe Bard, because they do have some drainage products. And I think, because our starting point is going to be in the ER, having, companies that call the emergency department their call points is a good place to start, right? So but if our business expands beyond the ED and goes into primary care, I think our options are, expanding at that point.
Great. And what do you think you need to see as far as maybe traction or uptake to be able to get to that point?
Yeah, so we had this conversation earlier on with some of the big companies, and I think they are more in the market of acquisition rather than R&D. So they want to see a finished product, they want to see some sales traction, they want to see a patent, which we're halfway there at this point. And so we plan to launch in Q1. It'll be a limited launch and kind of see how the sales structure goes. And so from that standpoint, we may actually have two potential exit points, because if we gain some traction in the beginning, we may be an attractive purchase for somebody, or if not, then we go the 5 years and try to sell at that point.
Great, thank you so much. Vanessa, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for right now, we're really focused on building a viable independent business. We see a future where we expand into ambulatory specialties, where we continue kind of our 2 to 3x year-over-year growth. But of course, as we look at potential partners, maybe downstream, it might make sense to work with either data or population health vendors. There might be a play with payers there wanting to engage value-minded providers. And then of course, there's always a possibility that a big tech company could benefit from kind of all of the tools that we've put together and build applications on top of it.
Great, thank you. And Austin, last but not least.
Yeah. I mean, we're an endovascular device company, kind of first in class, building endovascular devices. There's a small group of the big buyers, the big players in this field, and I think that's what we're looking for. We're looking at the big med device companies. I think in order to get an exit, I think we need to be through our clinical study, but I think we'll see, with a good clinical study, I don't think an exit's going to be a big issue for us.
Great. Thank you. And I apologize. I forgot to announce our third poll for Certus. For those of you that are in the audience, we would love for you to give feedback to Austin and Certus on their company as well. And while you're doing that, I am going to thank everyone for joining us this evening. I know we just have a few more minutes. I want to thank our companies who presented, EM Device Lab, as well as Agathos and Certus Critical Care. Thank you for being here. It was a fun night. I really enjoyed hearing vastly different companies, and I really enjoyed hearing about it. Again, in the chat, if you are interested in being part of our clinical advisory board, there was a link in the chat to be able to do that. And also, if you're interested in getting more information on our Catalyst 2020 fund, there was a link in the chat about that as well. We are going to be announcing coming up a venture partner program for our most active members and investors. This will be invite only, and the details will be shared in a follow-up email. So I can't wait to hear more about that. Thanks to all of you who joined us. Please, 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 I'm going to give you another minute or two to fill out the feedback poll for Certus Critical Care. And again, great job to our startups tonight. We appreciate you being here. If you are a startup or an entrepreneur in the audience, our upcoming events are posted on the AngelMD website. We have several more that are going to be happening between now and the end of the year. Our next one is around women's health and pediatrics, followed by robotics. And then innovation in telehealth. So some really interesting ones coming up that may span multiple specialties. So I'm super excited about that as well. And as our last one of the year, we're actually going to feature AngelMD investments and in our AngelMD showcase. So lots of exciting things coming up. But if you're interested in being a startup to pitch, clearly we have all of 2021 as well if you don't fit into one of those categories. And you can reach out to me. I'll put my email here in the chat, and I'll send you the application form to be able to do that. Thanks again to everyone for joining us tonight. It's right at 7 o'clock on the button. So we will see all of you in about 2 weeks. Thanks for being here. Have a great night, everybody.